In the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, Maya lived a life shaped by the rules of a mother who could never be too cautious. Her father had left when she was young, leaving her mother to play both roles, both protector and disciplinarian. It wasn't easy, especially for a young girl full of dreams and desires to explore the world outside the safe bubble her mother had created. Maya always felt like she was missing something, like there was a whole world out there that her mother was shielding her from. Her mother's love, though fierce and unwavering, often felt suffocating. Maya had just turned 18, and she was itching for freedom, craving a life that wasn't dictated by curfews, rigid schedules, and constant warnings about the dangers of the world. One day, as she prepared to leave for her first semester of college, her mother's anxiety seemed to rise to new heights. "Remember, Maya, the world isn't kind to everyone, especially not to us," her mother warned, handing her a small suitcase. "There are things you don't understand yet, but you will. Be careful, always watch your back." Maya could tell there was something more behind her mother's words, a hidden fear that wasn't entirely rooted in logic. But she didn't ask. She had no intention of letting the suffocating grip of her past hold her back. Maya was determined to make a fresh start. College would be the first time she could truly spread her wings, meet people beyond the confines of her neighborhood, and carve out her own identity. She wanted to escape the shadow of the strict mother and the tight-knit world she had been raised in. Little did she know, this fresh start was about to take a turn she could never have imagined. The moment she stepped foot on campus, Maya knew something was different. The air was thick with the scent of new beginnings, with the promise of change. She found herself walking to class with a sense of anticipation, her mind racing with excitement and possibility. But there was a weight on her shoulders, something tugging at the back of her mind. It was then, on the third day, that she noticed him. At first, it was just a glance. She was sitting in the library, surrounded by piles of textbooks, her head buried deep in her studies, when she caught a brief glimpse of him from the corner of her eye. He was standing by the window, watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Maya quickly turned away, unsure of what to make of it. She had always been cautious, but something about the way he looked at her felt different. It was as though he knew something about her, something she didn't even know herself. She shook the thought from her mind, telling herself she was just being paranoid. After all, she was at college now, and everything would be fine. But in the back of her mind, that glance lingered. Maya's life quickly fell into a predictable rhythm at college. She went to class, hung out with new friends, and spent time working on her assignments. But every now and then, she would catch glimpses of him. The man who stood in the corners, watching her with those strange, knowing eyes. He was always there, at a distance, but always watching. One afternoon, after her last class, she decided to take a different route back to her dorm. As she walked across campus, she noticed him again, standing just outside the student center, leaning against a lamppost. His eyes were fixed on her, and Maya felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She quickly turned and tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling, but something compelled her to look back. He was still watching her. That night, as Maya sat in her dorm room, she tried to focus on her homework, but her mind kept drifting back to the man. Who was he? Why did he seem to know so much about her? She hadn't said anything to anyone about her concerns, but her gut was telling her something was wrong. As she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, she heard a soft knock at the door. Startled, she jumped up and opened it, only to find no one there. But as she looked down at the floor, she noticed something, a small piece of paper folded neatly on the ground. Maya picked it up, her hands trembling slightly. It was a message. "I know your secret. I know everything about you, Maya." The chill that ran through her was unlike anything she had ever felt. The message was short, cryptic, and terrifying. Someone knew her secret, and she didn't even know who they were. Her heart raced as she read the message again. What secret? What was going on? Maya's mind was reeling with questions, each one spinning out of control. She didn't have a secret. Did she? She couldn't think of anything that could link her to this mysterious stranger. But the message haunted her. The fear lingered like a shadow, creeping into her every thought. Over the next few days, more messages arrived. They were always left in the same spot, on her door, slipped under her window, or tucked inside the folds of her textbooks. Each message was a puzzle piece that made no sense. You're not the person you think you are. I know what happened at night. It's time for you to remember. Maya was terrified, but she couldn't bring herself to go to the police. She didn't have any concrete evidence, just a stack of unsettling messages. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just some prank, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. As the days wore on, she began to unravel parts of her past that she had buried deep. Memories long forgotten began to resurface, fragments of a night she had pushed to the back of her mind. It was the night her father had disappeared. The night she had been too young to understand what was really happening. Maya had always believed her father left because he couldn't handle the pressure of being a father, the pressure of raising a family. That's what her mother had always told her. But now, as these strange messages started to resurface memories, she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to the story. One evening, after hours of trying to make sense of it all, Maya was sitting in the library when she saw him again. This time, he was standing at the far end of the room, his eyes fixed on her, just as they had been before. Her heart skipped a beat, and without thinking, she walked toward him. "You know who I am," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but the words felt like they carried a weight she couldn't deny. He didn't answer at first. He just stood there, watching her, until he finally spoke. "I know more than you think." Maya's hands trembled as she stared at him, feeling a strange sense of recognition. "What do you want from me?" He leaned in slightly, his voice low and deliberate. "I want you to remember. I want you to understand why you're here. Why this is happening." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows before she could say another word. Her mind was spinning, but one thing was clear now. Her past was not what she had been told. Maya couldn't let go of the man's words. He had to be lying, right? But his presence, his knowledge of her, was too unsettling to ignore. She knew she had to find out who he was, and why he was so invested in her life. The next few days were a blur of frantic searching. Maya started going through her old family records, photographs, and anything that could shed light on the mystery of her father's disappearance. She hadn't thought about her father in years, not since her mother stopped talking about him altogether. But as she combed through the old family photos, one particular image caught her eye, a picture of her mother with a man, someone Maya didn't recognize. It was a photo from the early days of her parents' marriage, but there was something about the man's eyes, something in the way he looked at her mother that sent a chill down Maya's spine. Her heart raced as she connected the dots. The man in the photograph was the same man who had been watching her. But who was he really? Maya knew she had to confront him, but she didn't know where to start. She couldn't tell her mother. It would break her heart, and Maya wasn't ready for the truth. So, she decided to follow the stranger. Late that night, after everyone else on campus had gone to bed, Maya slipped out of her dorm room and followed him. She kept her distance, weaving through the darkened campus until she reached the edge of the woods. He was waiting for her there, standing in the shadows. Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man didn't speak at first. Instead, he turned to face her, and the truth hit her like a wave. The man standing before her wasn't just anyone. He was someone from her mother's past, someone whose presence had been hidden for years. "I'm the reason your father disappeared," he said simply. Maya's world tilted on its axis. Everything she had known, everything she thought was true, suddenly crumbled. Maya stood frozen, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. The man in front of her, the man who had been watching her, leaving cryptic messages, was the key to unlocking the truth of her father's disappearance. But what did he mean by saying he was the reason her father disappeared? "I know everything," he said, stepping closer. "Your father didn't leave by choice, Maya. He was taken. Taken by people who wanted to erase him from your life and from your memory." Maya's mind was spinning. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her voice failed her. The man continued, "Your father was involved in something dangerous, something that had to do with your mother's past. The reason she's kept you so close, protected you for so long, is because she knows what's out there. And now, you're being dragged back into it." Maya tried to step back, but the man grabbed her arm, his grip firm but not painful. "You can't run from the truth, Maya. Not anymore. You have to know the truth, or it will destroy you." The man's words struck a chord deep within her. Everything Maya had known about her family, about her life, was being torn apart. She had spent years running from her past, from the questions she had never dared to ask. Now, the truth was right in front of her, and it was more terrifying than she could ever have imagined. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The man sighed and pulled something from his coat pocket, a small envelope. "This will answer everything," he said. "You have to read it. It's time to face the truth, Maya." He handed her the envelope, and Maya's hand shook as she took it from him. Inside, there was a letter, written in her father's handwriting. The letter explained everything, the truth about her father's disappearance, the dangers he had faced, and the sacrifices he had made to protect her. The stranger's identity became clear. He was someone from her father's past, someone who had been trying to protect Maya from the same dangers her father had faced. He wasn't an enemy. He was a guide, helping her understand the legacy that had been hidden from her. The truth hung heavy in the air as Maya read the letter. Her fingers trembled as the words sank in. Her father had been involved in a secret, dangerous operation. He had worked as an informant for the police, exposing a network of criminal activity that reached far deeper than Maya could have imagined. He had kept her safe from it all, buried the truth so she wouldn't grow up in fear. But in doing so, he had made himself a target. The letter explained how Maya's father had been forced to disappear, leaving behind his family to protect them from the people who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. And the stranger, the man who had been watching her all this time, had been involved in the plan to keep her safe. His role had been to monitor her, to make sure she was still out of harm's reach, but he couldn't ignore the fact that Maya was ready to uncover the truth. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. The stranger was not a threat. He was an ally, one who had been trying to prepare her for this moment. But now, the weight of her father's disappearance was finally crashing down on her. Suddenly, a car engine rumbled in the distance, its headlights cutting through the trees. The stranger looked at her, his eyes serious. "They found us." Maya's stomach dropped as the sound of the car grew louder. She had no idea who they were, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't safe anymore. The mystery, the tension, it all made sense now. She had been living a life of false security, unaware of the shadow that had been hanging over her since the day she was born. "They'll come for you next," the stranger warned, his voice urgent. "You need to leave now." "No," Maya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not running anymore." She had spent her whole life running from the truth, from the secrets that had been buried so deep within her family. But now, everything was coming to light, and she wasn't going to let fear dictate her actions any longer. The car's headlights grew brighter, and with it, The tension thickened. Maya took a deep breath and looked at the stranger, her resolve hardening. I want to know who they are. I want to end this. The stranger nodded. Then it's time to face them. In that moment, Maya realized that her life would never be the same. She wasn't just a college student anymore. She was the daughter of a man who had risked everything to protect her, a woman standing on the edge of a dangerous truth that could shatter everything she thought she knew. And the only way to survive was to face the very people who had destroyed her father's life. The car stopped, and two men stepped out, their dark silhouettes cutting through the night. One of them, taller than the other, held a gun in his hand, his eyes scanning the area. Maya felt a surge of fear, but she held her ground, refusing to let herself be intimidated. I knew you'd come, the stranger said, stepping in front of Maya. But it's too late. You won't silence her now. The taller man smirked. You don't know who you're dealing with. She's already in too deep. Maya took a step forward. I know exactly who you are, she said, her voice steady. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the moment hanging over them all. Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to back down. The stranger had been right. This was the moment to take control of her life, to stop running from the darkness that had always loomed over her. The man with the gun raised it, but before he could fire, the stranger lunged forward, knocking him to the ground. The two men struggled, but Maya could see the strength and determination in the stranger's eyes. This was his fight, but he wasn't fighting alone anymore. Maya turned to the other man, the one who had been silent all this time. Who are you? She demanded. The man's face twisted into a sneer. I'm the one who made sure your father never came back. I'm the reason you've lived in the dark all these years. And I'll make sure you never get the truth. But Maya wasn't afraid anymore. With all the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, she understood the stakes. She understood the game they were playing, and she was ready to end it. As the stranger knocked the first man unconscious, Maya took a deep breath and walked toward the second man, her voice clear and unshakable. It's over. You can't hide anymore. The man looked at her, his eyes narrowing. He made a move to reach for a weapon, but before he could act, the stranger stepped in, his fist connecting with the man's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. It was over. The aftermath was quiet. The two men were unconscious, lying in the dirt beside the woods. Maya stood there, her heart still pounding, but a sense of relief washed over her. The danger was over. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. The stranger looked at her, his expression softening. You did well, he said. You faced them when no one else could. Maya smiled faintly, still processing everything that had just happened. I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd have to face the truth. You did more than face it. You conquered it, the stranger said, his voice full of respect. Maya glanced down at the letter her father had written. This letter, it changed everything. I finally understand why my father did what he did. And now, I know what I have to do. The stranger nodded. You're stronger than you think. Your father would be proud. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt free. The burden of the past that had haunted her for so many years was lifted. She had faced the darkness, uncovered the truth, and emerged stronger for it. As she turned to leave, ready to return to her life, the stranger smiled at her one last time. You'll be all right, Maya. You're free now. And with that, she walked into the future, no longer bound by the secrets of her past. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Maya was ready to face it, on her own terms. The shadow of her father's disappearance no longer loomed over her, and in its place was a newfound strength, a freedom that had always been within her reach, waiting for the moment when she would be ready to claim it. And with that, Maya embraced her future, unafraid and unburdened. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Also, check out the videos appearing on your screen now. There's more to explore. Stay tuned for the next adventure.